Hello, this is Thomas the Hermit,
And this is Chris Poulos.
and you are watching Utopiana.
Imagine there's no possession. I wonder if you can. Just like Stalin or Mao, eliminating their fellow man. Imagine all the people under Marxist control. Oh, you may say I have illusions, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us to stop the NWO.
Which would be the ape of the church, because he, the devil, is the ape of God. It will be the mystical body of the Antichrist.
Imagine.
Hello, Thomas the Hermit, and we're doing Utopiana tonight. Our topic is to develop a little bit more about Teresa Lisieux.
Yes. And the more we read Thomas, we're realizing how much of an amazing character this little saint was. She wasn't so little spiritually, that's for sure.
No, the misconception. Her writings are so sweet. You
Right.
know, in fact, I had my teacher of spirituality said that she really couldn't read her at first. Until she began to understand that there was much more to the little flower than this delicate little
Right.
daisy, beautiful little girl.
Right. It's her writing style that she puts things so sweetly and is just a matter of fact. But then when you really look at what she's talking about mystical experiences, and this is clearly she has heroic call to heroic virtue. She wants to suffer, and you're like, wait a minute, this is there's a little bit more going on than just someone who is this nice lady who's writing about her life. And Thomas, it was a little bit, you had to be very careful because sometimes she would just talk about moving from one place to the next, and she was preparing to go to the convent and certain daily going ons, and then the next thing you know, she would just write these deep paragraphs about her thoughts on God and God moving within her. So it seems as if she almost lived that way. She would live the daily, and but yet she would be in contact constantly with this deep supernatural relationship with God. It's really something else.
Yes, and she would hide a little bit in her
Right.
writings. She wouldn't talk like Teresa Vavla. Yes, I fixed the sound. I had the mute button on again. Go figure. I'm always forgetting something. But anyways, in her writings, she doesn't talk like Teresa Vavla. Teresa
Right.
Vavla says, God lifted me up. She's actually describing, you know, levitation, you
Right.
know. But Teresa's like, and God was really, really close to me and it was really cool. And you're like, well, did you have an ecstasy? She's not going to say that.
Right.
You kind of have to read between the lines.
Yeah. And if you have some experience with contemplative prayer and what happens there, you can kind of get what's happening. But she puts it in very, I wouldn't say simple terms, but she wouldn't really use those words. I had a I think she's one, really humble, and two, very simple. And I don't think that's part of her character and personality to really talk about herself like that. If anything, it's quite the opposite. She's always considering herself unworthy and can't do anything without Jesus, and I'm just a sinner. But at the same time, you're like, but she is really kicking butt here. I mean, by the time she got into the convent, where I read, she's already like, she's it's like she's already been in monastic life, and now she's kind of cemented in it. Especially after she was healed and delivered from the emotional fit she would have. She was kind of going through a lot after her mom died. Um,
Yeah,
and
Therese
so,
started out, with a perfect childhood.
yeah,
She was loved by everyone in her family. You know, everyone had her attention. But they raised her correctly. They set boundaries for her. She would get in trouble if she did something wrong. And it's very interesting that she was. As a little child, she seemed to have a a different kind of conscience. I want to read to you how sensitive her conscience was as a little child. Okay, check this out. Marie loves her little sister very much. This is actually her mother speaking, I think, from a letter. Indeed, she is a child who delights us all. She is extraordinarily outspoken, and it is charming to see her run after me to confess her childish faults. Mama, I pushed Celine. I slipped her once, but I'll not do it again. The moment she's done anything mischievous, everyone must know. Yesterday, without meaning to do so, she tore off a small piece of wallpaper. You would have been sorry for her. She wanted to tell her father immediately. When he came home 4 hours later, everyone else had forgotten about it, but she ran at once to Marie saying, "Tell Papa that I tore the paper." She waited there like a criminal for her sentence, but she thinks she is more easily forgiven if she accuses herself. We're talking about a little kid.
right,
I don't know how many little kids go and say, "I did something wrong,"
yeah,
So she seems to be very, very sensitive about doing something wrong, and it's very childish, you know. It's kind of funny when you think about it. Adults do real sins, and children just do little things, you know. And yet the adults are the ones who punish the children. It's like things are in reverse.
right,
But in any
right,
case, she's very, very sensitive conscience. You can see that from an early age.
right. And she continues to develop. Um, you as she develops, and she talks about her spiritual life. It's like it's because her parents introduced her to a relationship with Jesus. They were obviously, being that they're saints too, they were very excited, like all saints should be, to talk about Jesus. They were very excited to talk about their children, and children picked up on that. And Saint Therese, she was already blessed with this gift, as we can clearly see. She already had, like you said, Thomas, before when we were preparing, she was kind of a prodigy. But because of her parents, because they were so open about the living God, she always had a relationship based perspective. And that also is another rare thing, very sadly, Thomas, that I see amongst many Catholics. On top of that, because she has such a loving parental relationship, she so easily kind of sees, how there's a saying that parents are like, that seem like God to their children. It's like parents are the God to their children when their children are very early. Well, because she had such she admired her parents so much, she quickly could see, the daddy in the sky. She could see the same kind of love, but infinitely more with God. Another thing, honestly, Thomas, I see very little of in people's spiritual walks. So she had something very, very precious and blessed.
Well, yeah, Chris, the parents, well, the parents were canonized saints.
Yeah,
Okay, that mean they both wanted to be in the. We covered this last week. They both wanted to be religious, but they couldn't get in. God had other plans for them. But when they had these children and raised them, Zelly, the mother, wanted all of her kids to become religious. You
Yeah.
know, not that she forced it upon them. But they went to mass daily, and they God was a very, very real aspect to their lives. And this is the environment that little Therese grew up in. To her, God was a reality.
Right.
Heaven was a reality. In America here, we kind of bought into the whole deist idea, meaning that, we're not going to force anything upon our kids. We're going to let them choose when they become of a certain age. Almost like it's a crime to raise your kids in an environment that they should love God and that God is real. It's very, but Therese did not grow up in any such environment at all. Complete opposite.
Yes. Thomas, you want to move on to another point, or you want to keep going on
No, no,
this one?
let's move on, Chris.
All right.
What?
Um, so one of the things that I picked up, Thomas, some people might be asking, well, okay, she was a gifted child, and she's clearly a saint in the making. But I didn't have that. I didn't have that background. I'm a sinner. I'm an adult. I'm definitely not a kid anymore, and I'm not as holy as she was. I'm not as holy as she
Yeah,
was
yeah.
as she
What
is in
what what
chapter
does
6.
what does the little flower have to do with me? I mean,
Right. Yeah.
she was practically, she was almost like the Immaculate Conception. I mean, what, how,
Right.
but that would
So
be misreading her life.
exactly. And we're finding the reasons as we read. We're finding the reasons to why the Lord is leading us to the little way and why it relates to laity. Because I mean, as laity, we seem to be having the same, maybe not the exact same, but a similar crisis when we read the lives of saints, and then we can look at our daily states in life. It's like, you know, even if I wanted to, where would be the opportunity to be a great, Saint Paul or something? I have mouths to feed, I have bills to pay, right? And then you have people that wonder, well, how do you even get to the point where you want to suffer and die? Even I asked myself that question. And how did this even happen? And I think the problem is we have, as Catholics, a cart before the horse approach, where we think it works like, working out of the gym, or you get better at a skill at a business. Whereas when it comes to holiness, it's Jesus and you and Jesus, and it is a supernatural transformation. It's something that, the experience of God, and we see that unfold as she writes. It's the experiences of God that come, and then she just gets more and more inspired, and God eventually leads her to the next level where she wants to sacrifice. She wants to give back to her lover. She
Okay.
recognized herself as the beloved.
Okay. She
Um,
she herself um, wanted to specify that she had faults. Now,
right.
it is true that her confessor said she never committed a mortal sin. That is true. But that doesn't mean that she didn't have problems, okay? Or that she didn't have tendencies that led to committing, venial sins. Okay, I'm going to read a couple of passages for you that elicit this about the little flower, and try not to compare it to yourself, because she's not teaching about the severity of sin. She's
Mhm.
teaching about the severity of human weakness. Okay, and it is within that human weakness that we all fall. Okay, and so she's confessing her own human weakness. And this is about when she was a child. I had another thought also, of which my mother did not speak in her letters. It was self love. Here are two instances. One day, no doubt wishing to see how far my pride would go, she smiled and said to me, Therese, If you will kiss the ground, I will give you a halfpenny. In those days, a halfpenny was a fortune, and in order to gain it, I had not far to stoop, for I was so tiny. There was not much distance between me and the ground, but my pride was up in my arms, and holding myself very erect, I said, "No, thank you, Mama. I would rather go without it." And here's another one. Another time we were going into the country to see some friends. Mama told Marie to put on my prettiest frock, but not to let me have bare arms. I did not say a word and appeared indifferent as children of that age should be, but I said to myself, I should have looked much prettier with bare arms. So one is seems much more severe than the other. She is talking about, I'm not going to humble myself to get a penny, and the other is a little taste of vanity. And her
Right.
her parents tried to guard her from vanity. They didn't like when people came around and said, "Oh, she's such a pretty girl" and stuff like that. But you know, she is trying to say, look, I didn't have it together,
Right.
you know. And later on, when her mother dies, she gets kind of mentally sick,
Right.
you know. Chris?
And that's something that I really think is important. It's not just the fact that she's showing humility and saying, I'm a mess too, but I also think that the way she approaches her messed upness and her sins is just such a wonderful way. It involves, not only does it involve this, like she runs up to her mom and say, "Mommy, I'm sorry," and she has that ingrained in her, but she looks at her brokenness as something that God is going to fix and wants to fix, and she has confidence in that. And that kind of leads her into this crusade against herself when she realizes, I can't be like Saint Joan of Arc. I don't have the means to do that. And, I don't completely trust myself, but I have the desire to be like that. I have a very deep desire. But at the same time, when that humility that she's giving, that confident humility, that's confident in God's power and grace, that leads her to her great holy endeavors where she starts crucifying herself against self-love. And that's something that I think the laity and anyone in the Catholic Church can do a lot. We can do a lot in that department. We need to do a lot in that department. The idea of self-love being bad and taking on that is a lot more difficult than I think we realize, Thomas. And you don't. You were telling me sometimes maybe it's easier to do the super hardcore fasting or whipping yourself than to, like, let's say, not uh, get mad at someone back, or, like, to turn the other cheek. That's pretty darn difficult. As I was reading Thomas, I felt pretty convicted. I'm like, wow, she's she's way ahead of me.
She's doing very difficult things.
I would have said something back to her. Oh, you said that to me. Well, let me tell you something. That's our human condition right there.
Okay, I'm going to give another example of Teresa's early childhood, and this is very interesting to me because remember we're talking about also how she was raised differently. Okay, love of good as well. It was enough to tell me once, you must not do that. For instance, as I had great self-love and an innate love of good as well, it was enough to tell me once, you must not do that, and I never wanted to do it again. Having only good examples before my eyes, I naturally wished to follow it. And I see with pleasure in my mother's letters that as I grew older, I began to be a great comfort. This is what she writes in 1876. Even Therese is anxious to make sacrifices. Marie has given her little sisters a string of beads on purpose to count their acts of self-denial. They have really spiritual but very amusing conversations together. Celine said the other day, how can God be in such a tiny host? Teresa answered, "That is not strange, because God is almighty. And what does almighty mean? It means that he can do whatever he likes." You know, here we kind of see the prodigy coming out. This is a little kid. Okay, this little kid is showing understanding of deep theological issues. Now, she expresses them as a kid, but you can almost hear a touch of Thomas Aquinas in these words, you
Right.
know. And then the other thing is Marie gives her these beads. So she's doing these little sacrifices as a little kid, and she's counting her sacrifices. This is already becoming a part of her life as a child. This,
Yes.
this spirituality.
And I'd say that not only was she physically a child, but it also touches on the childlike manner Christ talks about in the scriptures, where he says one must be like a child. Of course, they don't. He doesn't mean throwing temper tantrums. Don't be childish, like a lot of adults are. What he means is, and from what I'm gathering, from what I'm reading, I think she's honing in on. She is excited about pleasing the Lord. It's like how a kid who wants to do mom and dad proud, and they're just so excited and they want to really help, and especially the little ones, they just want to do this and that. She has that fervor that's very she has that relation with God, and she's starting to see it. She's putting two and two together. Um, that I think is something that is really something we can work on. This idea of an adventure, and you are on this planet to do good and to sacrifice for God and to make things better. That she really took that to heart. She went straight to the point.
And
She went
she
straight
did
to
it
the
at a
core of the
very
matter.
young age.
Yes.
She did it at a very young age. Um, at the end of chapter 1, we kind of get this ending. "I had great self-command and made a practice never complaining when my things were taken. Dear mother, how happy I was at that age. I was beginning to enjoy life and goodness. Itself seemed full of charms. Probably my character was the same as it is now, for even then I had great self-command and made a practice of never complaining when my things were taken. Even if it was unjustly accused, I preferred to keep silence. There was no merit in this, for I did it naturally." So the little flower whose story I'm writing had to pass through the winter of trial and to have her tender cup filled with the dew of tears. So the little flower, up to the age of 4.5, is living in a kid's paradise.
Yeah.
She feels absolutely loved by her family. She's growing, she's learning, she's thriving, and then her mom dies.
Right.
And I'm going to add something to this, because this is something that I heard from something psychological I read somewhere. If a kid doesn't have a great childhood, then they don't lose it. But if you have a great childhood and then it's taken away from you, then you really feel like you have lost something. And I really think that that's what happened to Teresa. She had an awesome mom, and life seemed like a beautiful field of flowers. And then all of a sudden, lights out.
Right.
Life can have bitterness. And then begins the next chapter of her life. And what's interesting about the next chapter is that this 4.5-year-old child is going to be going actually through the purgative state of spirituality. So between the ages of about 13 to 4.5, she's going through the dark night of the senses. And if you can read her writings in that context, Does she have good days? Yes. But she has a lot of sadness at this time and a lot of disappointment. The first two really big disappointments that happened to her that I can specify, okay? Pauline becomes her surrogate mother.
Hmm.
But Pauline leaves for the convent. Then Marie replaces Pauline. Then Marie goes to the convent. But when Pauline went to the convent, it just about broke little Therese. She actually became terribly sick. And she had delusions. She saw things, that weren't there. It was a crazy kind of illness that she had, you know. But in the darkness of the loss of her mother was compounded when Pauline went to the convent, because Pauline, who's the second oldest, had became her surrogate mother, and then Pauline left. And this was one of those sicknesses that seemed to be unto death, you know.
Yeah.
It seemed to be unto death. And this was only one aspect of the Dark Night. She was also bullied. You want to talk about being bullied? She had
They'll do it.
she was 8 years old, and get this, okay? She was gifted. She was at the top of her class. Everyone was in the same classroom, and little 8-year-old Therese was at the top of the class. The 14-year-old who wasn't as intelligent didn't like that and began picking on her. So when she went to school, she was tormented by this 14-year-old girl. And, but when she got home, she would light up because her father was there, and her father would she would tell her father, well, I got good marks in school and this, that, and the other. She's having, she had the safety of her home, but outside of that, she was very, very unhappy at the Abbey school that she was going to. Chris?
Right. Yes, and when I see this, I see how God seems to be, he's already revving her up for great things. You can see that it's not, these aren't coincidences. It has this particular flavor of, there's an invisible hand going on here where she is being put to the test in a way, purified. And it, when she has her, and I don't want to, unless you want to really get into this, Thomas, but when she has her moment with the Blessed Mother, you definitely can tell that this is something that's within the works, and I've never really seen an example of like a dark night of the senses where it's through particular incidences that happen in life, like losing her mom at that age, or being picked on, losing her sisters. I've always kind of read it as, and you've probably read more, but like kind of like this spiritual desolation of some kind. You can't really, you don't feel like God's around. You kind of know He is, you kind of know He isn't. That's the dark night of the senses, and then you're just kind of stuck for a bit,
Well,
for however long it
Chris, the
is.
Dark Night of the Senses is where God teaches us to be detached from the material world.
Hmm.
That the world is not such a great place. That it's not our home. That heaven is our home. The world is full of difficulties and pain and suffering, and it's kind of like the world kicking you. You
Hmm.
know, you want to be in love with me? Well, I'm an unfaithful mistress. I will hurt you.
I
You
see.
know, so
And that lines up with what's happening here.
yeah, she's discovering that life can be very, very sad. You know, she had this great experience, almost like heaven, when she's a little kid. You know,
Right.
and now she's tasting the unhappiness of the world, and she doesn't like it very much. All through her writings, she begins saying at this time that she is looking towards heaven. Let me read you what she records and says about her mother's death. All the details of my mother's illnesses are still fresh in my mind. I remember especially her last weeks on earth, when Celine and I felt like poor little exiles. Every morning a friend came to fetch us, and we spent the day with her. Once we had not had time to say our prayers before starting on the way. My little sister whispered, "Must we tell her that we have not said our prayers?" "Yes," I answered. So very timidly Celine confided our secret to her, and she exclaimed, "Well, well, you children shall say them." Then she took us to a large room and left us there. Celine looked at me in amazement. I was equally astonished and exclaimed, "This is not like Mama." She always said our prayers with us. During the day, in spite of all efforts to amuse us, she thought of her dear mother, was constantly in mind. I remember once when my sister had an apricot given to her. She leant towards me and said, "We will not eat it, I will give it to Mama." Alas, our beloved mother was now too ill to eat any earthly fruit. She would never more be satisfied but by the glory of heaven. There she would drink of the mysterious wine which Jesus at his Last Supper promised to share with us in the kingdom of his Father. The touching ceremony of extreme unction made a deep impression on me. I can still see the place where I knelt and hear my poor father's sobs. My dear mother died on August 28, 1877, in her 46th year. The day after her death, my father took me in his arms and said, "Come and kiss your dear mother for the last time." Without saying a word, I put my lips to her icy forehead. I do not remember having cried much, and I did not talk to anyone of all that filled my heart. I looked and listened in silence, and saw many things would have hidden from me. Once I found myself close to the coffin in the passage. I stood looking at it for a long time. I'd never seen one before, but I knew what it was. I was so small that I had to lift up my head to see its whole length, and it seemed to me very big and very sad. So there you go. You know,
Right.
this is a traumatic experience for little Therese, and it
Yes.
alters her. It completely alters her. All right, she is. I'm not going to say that she had PTSD from it. Okay, but it was a big trauma. It really changed her. It was a good taste of some real suffering.
Yeah. And I think that she, during this time, she responded to it, and she kind of looks. She's writing this, looking back on it. She's responding to these negative experiences in a very human way. She has some. Her behavior kind of goes down the tubes, relatively speaking, for her. She does have she has melancholy, uh, and but when she starts emerging from it, I think it was those ingrained understandings of faith and confidence in God that just got boosted from all that. I looking at the later parts of her chapter, and then the later parts of the other chapters. It's like she she wouldn't be as trusting in God if she didn't kind of go through all of that. So that's just another example of, you know, God testing the faithful, trying to get them to trust Him more instead of the world. Um, and I just like the human way she wrote it, how she reacted, and I think that applies to us very well, because we don't. I think we have an issue also with looking at suffering the wrong way. Now she was a kid, so she didn't have like the feel. She didn't have Fulton Sheen videos to watch. They didn't have the internet. But I think there are still people that run away from suffering. They don't see, and that actually is kind of connected to not really seeing God as that real or as that important. But for someone that sees God as very real and very important, that's a completely different. Especially after mom dies, now you're thinking about the four last things all the time. Now you're thinking like, get me out of here. This place is terrible. And I think a lot of people in their comforts don't want to admit the world is dark. I see a lot of goofy behavior, and now with the coronavirus here, it's like the summer of all fears. I'm like, the people are acting exactly as I think they would. They're panicking. What this wasn't supposed to happen. It's like, well, I hate to tell you this, but in China, there are people getting persecuted and martyred all the time. In Africa, people starve to death. The world isn't that wonderful. It's a fallen world. Despite the trees and flowers out there, evil and death and sickness exists.
Yeah, Therese. Um, okay, this is about the effects of her mother's death. I must tell you that after my mother's death, my naturally happy disposition completely changed. Instead of being lively and demonstrative as I'd been, I became timid, shy, and extremely sensitive. A look was enough to make me burst into tears. I could not bear to be noticed or to meet strangers, and was only at ease in my own family circle. There I was always cherished with the most loving care. My father's affectionate heart seemed endowed with a mother's love, and my sisters were no less tender and devoted. If our Lord had not lavished so much love and sunshine on his little flower, she never could have become acclimatized to this earth. Still too weak to bear the storm, she needed warmth, refreshing dew, and soft breezes, and these gifts were never wanting to her, even in the chilling season of trial. When I read those words, the chilling season of trial, I'm going, come on, Therese. You know, it's not like you got thrown into a Nazi concentration camp. And
Right.
part of me feels that way, but she's trying to tell her experience. She's trying to tell the truth of her experience. And we need to pay attention when she says that. We don't need to dismiss it. We don't need to say, "Oh, you cute little girl," whatever. There was something very trying going on with her. This was a trial for her. This was her dark night of the senses.
Yeah. And I think that we often don't realize how something that may seem, and that's another thing she talks about. She flips the script on what's considered like a big suffering or a big act of virtue. Her whole life, it's little. It doesn't mean little spiritually. She was a giant spiritually, but what it means is that it seems like something that you can encounter in daily life. These are things that we can relate to. The death of a loved one. Um, Trying to treat someone with kindness, living a daily life of love. Now we on the one hand, it seems pretty hard, but it's not like this is going off and becoming a bishop or something, or a missionary. This is someone who's living a day-to-day life. Yes, she does become a religious consecrated, but even within that, she talks constantly about these little things that most people would consider little. I think that's what it really is. Most people consider, whatever, you know, but they're not. They're not in God's eyes.
Everything with Therese is little, but in the littleness, it is gigantic. You have to look
Right.
at the littleness of it, and then to see what happened and why it happened. If you don't understand the intricacies, you won't see. And if you try to actually do what she's doing, you'll come face to face with your own inadequacies.
I tried it, by the way, this week. I flopped on my face. I got an F. I'm sorry. I was like, all right, let's give this a test run. I lasted for like maybe 4 hours, and I'm like, all right, I'm back to lunch.
Okay, well, I've been in prayer a long time, some 40 years. And I'm looking at the little way and I'm going, yeah, right. I'm like, oh, well, that looks tough. Uh,
Yeah.
you mean actually live the gospel and love my neighbor? How am I going to do that? You know, uh,
Uh-oh.
which is scary because
Yeah,
love is everything in being a Christian.
that's right.
And if I have to confess something like that, then it would be like, well, Thomas, you can pray for 40 years, but if you have not love, you have nothing.
Right.
So I have to take a look at Teresa and go, okay, what can then the little flower teach me that I need to learn? Everyone can learn from the little flower. I was a third order Carmelite for a couple of years, and when I was with that group, we would get the Carmelite priests and brothers to come in, and they would share things with us. They were constantly talking about Teresa. This is not a little doctrine. This is not anything minor. You know,
Right.
I exhort everyone that you have to look beyond the language. You have to begin to understand the real theology of what is going on with Therese. I'm going to give you a little change of pace here. Again, this is when she's going through these trials, but on Sundays she would spend time with her father, and I'm going to read that to you, and then I'm going to talk about it a little bit. Those are especially happy days for me when I went fishing with my dear king. She's talking about her father, as I used to call him. Sometimes I tried my hand with a small rod of my own, but generally I preferred to sit on the grass some distance away. Then my reflections became really deep, and without knowing what meditation meant, my soul was absorbed in prayer. Far off sounds reached me, the murmuring of the wind, sometimes a few uncertain notes of music from a military band in the town a long way off. All this imparted a touch of melancholy to my thoughts. Earth seemed a place of exile, and I dreamed of heaven. See, she is going through this trial, but she's also growing in her prayer life.
Right.
See, both things are happening. She's not just going through a trial. I was thinking about this for a while because I went through some stuff when I was a kid, and it messed me up. You know, there's a difference between going through stuff with God, with faith, and just going through stuff.
Yeah.
You can go through stuff, it can mess you up. Life can be very traumatic. We don't even want to think about the things that can happen to people. You know, they're so bad. I wanted to say this earlier. I'm going to go ahead and say it now. It's just an off the cuff statement. Why did the revisionists want to reject the whole idea that the Holocaust never happened?
Right.
Because it seems unbelievable that life could be that evil. We want to block it out. We don't
Right.
want to see that life could be that bad. You know? But when you walk by faith, this is very, very important. This is something that we need to learn. And it is in the life of most every saint, all right? You're persevering by faith in the darkness of faith, and you will grow with God. Teresa's
Right.
doing the same thing, all right? She's a little girl. She's over here. She's by the lake, you know. She's getting lost in contemplative prayer. She's getting lost in contemplative prayer. It's
Hmm.
something that happens when you sit in nature. You see the beauty of the lake, the trees.
Yep.
Maybe there's ducks on the lake. I don't know, but whatever it is, and it's lifting her spirit to God. At the same time, she's dealing with this thing, that's going on inside of her that's saying, life really is messed up.
Yes.
My mother should have been there. My mother should have always have been there. I shouldn't have had to experience this. As a child, You know how you know things as a child, but you can't articulate them? Chris,
Hmm.
you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
You know? When my father was scaring the living life out of me, the thought came into my head, this is going to damage me.
Yeah.
What my father did is going to damage me. How did a 5-year-old kid know that? But what does the little Teresa know? What does she see? How does she respond to it? Okay? All
Hmm.
right? During this time, all right, this difficulty of losing her mother is not a wasted grace
Yes.
because she already loves God. She's in a relationship with God. This,
To add to that, yeah,
yes, Chris.
Thomas, just right there, and on top of that, she's centered just like how she's centered on loving neighbor in the gospel. She centers God as love. That's her biggest takeaway about God, and that changes her whole perspective. She never doubts the goodness of God. Like, if she's dreaming about heaven as this is happening, that means, if anything, this is just making her love God and His goodness because the world is so, messed up. It's just drawing her closer to Him. And that's another thing that is of huge importance. If we don't see God as love, we can have a really warped understanding of our faith. If we don't see that God and if we look at Jesus on the cross and we see, oh, that's a super holy person I can't be, or we see us, some guy who it thinks of he's kind of like some kind of weird spiritual narcissist or something. He wants to show, oh, look, see, I'm the only. You can have all these weird ideas going through it. Not Therese. She knew that God was love and He loved her, and that helped her get through it. And I think that's very important if you're gonna really take being a Christian seriously, or you're in trouble. If you think of God as Allah or something like that, you got some serious brokenness that you'll never get over.
Therese is in a love relationship with God. It
Right.
starts early on. By the time she's 3 years old, she's already in love with God. And she wants to be in heaven. She told her mother, Mother, I want you to die so you can go to heaven. Mom
There you go.
died. Mom died.
She did.
Of course, she was acting like a little kid, but she believed in heaven. She believed in the goodness of God. When we start out on our spiritual path, if we don't start off with a love relationship with God, I don't really think we can get very far.
Right.
Why are we thinking that, we're going to go get a whip and start beating ourselves, and eventually we're going to beat ourselves to a pulp so good that we're going to submit to God's will, and then we're going to have a relationship with Him?
Yeah.
Where do we think such things exist? We talk about the joy of Saint Francis.
Right.
You
Uh,
know, you know
weird
we,
kind of joy if it wasn't that.
but by the Middle Ages, they started really getting into this. Now, if you do not have a love relationship with God, that's probably Martin Luther right there. You
Right.
know, Martin
Very good. Yeah.
Luther. I don't know if Martin Luther discovered a love relationship with God. I think that he did. And he did it through the passages of scriptures that became a dividing thing, which caused a schism in the church. Um, but Martin Luther was busy beating himself and wearing
Yes, he
hair
was very
shirts and all that,
scrupulous.
and
Yep.
he didn't discover, you know, all Martin Luther had to do was discover that God loved him, and then I think history may have been quite different.
Yeah.
But he discovered a passage of scripture and said, we're doing it all wrong. Well, no, Martin Luther, you were doing it all wrong, because if you had really interacted with a person of faith, maybe you would have discovered that it was about the love of God. And I think
Right.
that that's the distorted picture that us Catholics have. That we need to hurt ourselves, and then we can go meet God because we've straightened ourselves out. Well, I don't know about you, but no matter how much I inflict upon myself, I can't make myself behave.
Yeah.
I mean that
And
that's
and you know
go ahead.
that I think that may be, Thomas. I'm just, it's coming to my head. Maybe that's one of the reasons why the Lord has led us to His Sacred Heart. Not only is it a wonderful focus point for the imagery, but um, the imagery of the Sacred Heart is one of love, and when we experience God in prayer, in the contemplative prayer, it's an experience of love. And honestly, Thomas, looking back from the whole year, and Liz, you were there. You're one of our guinea pigs, right? And I don't know, but Sweet Harmony, I don't know how long she's been here, but it's like people were acting like they landed on the moon, or it was bigger than that. It was like, what the heck was that? People were not expecting that, and that just goes to show you that there's something going on where we have this strange complex where it's almost like we resist God before He can even do anything with us. Like we're just clamming up. We have a clammed up, and I can go on and on about how this is societal implications too, but we seem to be clammed up and not really getting that part. It isn't stoicism, guys. It isn't masochism. It isn't anything like that. And if it was, then what would even be the point of this grace and these intercessors and Jesus on the cross and Jesus talking about love all the time? I just really, it could be any other religion, wouldn't it? I mean, there are plenty of other religions and cults and military departments you can join where they can break you down and hypnotize you and torture you until you're behaved or something. That sounds a little bit New World Order-y, to be honest. But that's not what this is.
Okay, I'm going to read another example. There's much more that we were going to share today, but it just seems like the topic is just too big. But I'm going to read this to you, and then next week we're going to get to more of this. Teresa, I titled this Teresa Throws a Fit. One evening when we went to our prayers, I said to her, this is talking about Victoria, I think she's a cousin, will you begin the memorare? I'm going to light the candles. She tried to begin and then looked at me and burst out laughing. Seeing my precious vestas burning quickly away, I begged her once more to say the memorare. Again there was silence, broken only by bursts of laughter. All my natural good temper deserted me. I got up feeling dreadfully angry, and stamping my foot furiously, I cried out, Victoria, you naughty girl! She stopped laughing at once and looked at me in utter astonishment, then showed me, too late, the surprise she had stored hidden under her apron. 2 pieces of candles. My tears of anger were soon changed into tears of sorrow. I was very much ashamed and grieved, and made a firm resolution never to act in that way again. So here we have Teresa losing it. She loses her cool. You know, um, we're not going to be able to get to all the wonderful things that we wanted to talk about today. We will continue this topic again next week on Utopiana. I think the main message today is try to realize that Therese became a saint out of love. She was, her experience of meditating by the lake was an experience of God's goodness.
Right.
She's entering into prayer. Okay? She didn't know how to do it. All of this grew out of um, a natural outflow of her family life. You know, my teacher, my guitar teacher, classical guitar teacher, Thomas Gabe, studied under Pepe Romero. Pepe
Right.
Romero is a world-class classical guitarist. Okay, and that lineage goes all the way back to Teresa, who's considered the father of the classical guitar. But Pepe Romero said, "I never had a formal lesson."
Hmm.
His father was a guitarist. He just grew up around it. He just kind of learned, Dad was there as he was learning the guitar, as he was trying to play it or learn it or whatever. His dad was there to say, why don't you put your hand like this? Or that's not the right note, or whatever it is that was going on. He just grew up around it.
Right.
Therese grew up around the love of God. One of the things that I see in the picture that is dividing me and Chris, when I look at the picture of Zelly and Lewis, okay, I can kind of discern things in pictures, kind of like my gift of artistic criticism, okay. In the artistry of this picture, I see two people that love each other, but I see two people who loved God first.
Mm.
They loved God first. And I was reflecting upon that early this morning. I was thinking, if they loved God first, what is the implication? Well, I was married once, about 20 years ago. And after 10 years, I failed in my marriage. But I could see that when you love God first, you're concerned about doing the will of God.
Right.
Zelly is concerned about doing God's will. She is going to take care of her husband, not because she loves her husband, but because she loves God. And Lewis is going to take care of his family, not because he loves his family, but because he loves God. When this family is doing it right, and the
Yes.
love of God is within their family, Therese, like Pepe Romero, little Pepe, learns the guitar just through osmosis. Therese, just from the environment of what she's living in, learns the love of God. And that relationship propels her to sainthood.
Mm.
And if you ask me, Chris, this is just a speculation that I have, but that family, I think every one of them is a saint.
Mm.
They may not be all canonized, but if you look at the rest of the daughters, the least important daughter, Leonie, the black sheep, was declared a servant of the God of God. You know,
Wow.
Pauline was mother superior of her convent for life. Marie submitted to Pauline, the eldest sister. This
Right.
family didn't behave the way a lot of families do. Therese is the
Right.
prodigy. Are they like jealous of her?
No.
They help her in every way they can. Celine is 4 years older. When Therese says, "I want to go be a nun," Celine tries to help her. She goes to Dad, says, "I want to be a nun." They say, "Okay." Dad says, "Okay, we got to get you in the convent."
Right.
Everyone supported her.
Right.
This is an environment of love. Therese falls in love. You need to fall in love. You need to be in love, and because you are in love, then you can say what Therese said. Sacrifice became a joy to me.
Mm.
She says that. Sacrifice became a joy.
How could that be without com- a passionate love experience, without something from the heart stirring you to do that?
The love of God.
Exactly.
With that, we're going to go ahead and close out this series of Utopiana. Next week, we're going to continue this. There's so much here. I want more and more people to try to help us to filter through the sweet language and discover the theology of Dr. Teresa Lisieux.
Amen.
country. It isn't hard to do. Only the one world government telling everyone what to do. Imagine all the people enslaved to the few. Oh, you may say I have illusions, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you will join us to stop the NWO.
That will in all externals resemble the church as the mystical body of Christ.